This wooden spear was found in Leringen, northern Germany. It's about 120,000 years old and was found amongst the butchered remains of an extinct species of elephant, the European straight-tusked elephant. The creator of the tool and the hunter of the elephant was certainly a Neanderthal, modern humanity's distant cousin and part-time lover, who roamed Eurasia between roughly 400,000 and 40,000 years ago. Leringen is a contender for the furthest north Neanderthal site ever discovered. So, is this as far north as Neanderthals ever got? Almost certainly not. There's something strange about the position of Leringen. There are no major natural barriers immediately north of here. No mountains, no huge rivers, no deserts, and depending on the time period, no ice. So could Neanderthals have gone even further north? And if so, how far? Did Neanderthals ever reach Scandinavia? I had the opportunity to speak to a team of scientists trying to answer that very question. Trini, Emil, and Peter of the NeanderEDGE project. Using a combination of modern technology and good old-fashioned boots on the ground, they're trying to push the limits of what we know about Neanderthals. Push the limits of the Neanderthal range. Seems like a simple question to ask, but answering it is actually very, very tricky. Very tricky. And yeah, I can't wait to share this video with you. If you're a nerd about these things like me, I think you're going to find it interesting. If you Google Neanderthal range, you're going to end up with a map something like this. This is an okay map, but it has two major drawbacks. First, it's based on the location of Neanderthal remains, not even just artifacts, human remains. This blob down here is a result of the Teshik-Tash Neanderthal. Over here, this blob is because of the Neanderthals at Denisova Cave. There are obvious gaps, of course, where there's no Neanderthal remains found yet, like this big stretch across Central Asia, this little patch in Bosnia. You know, if Neanderthals are in the surrounding region, they almost certainly lived in Bosnia too. You'll find out later in the video that Neanderthals would probably really love Bosnia, and not just because of the Slivovica. I'm sure you can recognize the problem with this map. The archaeological record is incomplete. It always will be incomplete. Not everything is preserved for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and of the stuff that does get preserved, of course we haven't found it all. So although the regions in this map were definitely part of the Neanderthal range, are they the entire range? Almost certainly not. The second problem with this map is that it's static.
Historically, archaeologically, we're working with static maps of range, right? And that's also what we described earlier on, that you see a map and you maybe it's in a given time frame, and then you see a distribution. But obviously, real organisms are complex, right? And you cannot build something that's static in time in terms of trying to understand how a species is adapting and changing environmental adaptations.
You can see the problem here. We've got a static map based on incomplete evidence to represent hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. This is where the team at NeanderEDGE comes in, funded by the
Independent Research Fund Denmark.
How do you say hello in Danish? Hey, Denmark.
Hi, Denmark.
That's so similar to English. I don't know why, I wasn't expecting that. Their aim is to understand Neanderthal adaptations at the northern edge of this boundary, to push the limits of this northern boundary, which is not easy to do. The further north you go, the harder it becomes to do archaeology in a way, at least when you go deeper and deeper in time. And that challenge is all because of ice. Did Neanderthals go bald, guys? I don't know, but I am. And I think you are too, judging from the fact that Keeps wants to sponsor my videos again. Going bald is a bummer. It affects 2 out of 3 men by the time you're 35, and it's just our evolutionary curse. It's hard to avoid. But if you don't want to go bald, you don't have to. Keeps provides professional hair care from the comfort of your home. Simply fill out a question to get started, and they will match you with one of their providers if that's necessary. These treatments are scientifically proven to work, okay? It's not fairy dust. This is all FDA-approved medical treatments. But more than that, they've got thickening shampoo, conditioner, pomade, or hair gel, as we would call it in Britain. Pomade, am I saying that right? They've got it all. One-stop shop for professional hair care. They've got thousands and thousands and thousands of 5-star reviews. They've helped over 1 million chaps get their hair back. They've helped 1 million chaps go from this Neanderthal to this Neanderthal. Orders can be shipped in 3, 6, 12-month installments, whatever works for you. You can adjust it or cancel it at any time. For a special offer to get started, go to keeps.com/Stefan Milo. Helps the channel, helps you get your hair back, or go to the link in the description. That's keeps.com/Stefan Milo. All right, let's see how far north these Neanderthals got. Wow, it's bright. Sunny day. Bad day to be bold. 25,000 years ago, the world experienced what scientists call the last glacial maximum, or LGM for short. This was the last great expanse of ice sheets. The ice went as far south as the Midlands in England and northern Germany. These glaciers totally changed local environments.
So a glacier is this very big chunk of ice that's just bulldozed through the landscape, right?
Valleys became wider, deeper, and more U-shaped, like these valleys in Glencoe, Scotland. Other areas saw huge amounts of sediment deposited, like these small oval hills in the Lake District. Glaciers are just a very slow but very powerful geological force. They can obviously easily destroy an archaeological site. You're reshaping a whole valley. What chance is there of the archaeology surviving? Very little. This problem up north is exacerbated by the lack of caves too. Further south in southern Germany, France, Spain, Italy, we learn a lot about Neanderthals from excavating caves. The caves shield a lot of archaeology from the elements, and obviously they shielded Neanderthals from the elements too. That's why there's so much archaeology there. Again, further north, there just aren't these great cave sites. Neanderthals would have been living out in the open much more. These open sites are hard to find under the best conditions, never mind after a glacier has scoured the land.
So that means that what defines our northern boundary is based on finds, but the finds are probably highly biased, both in terms of geology, but also research history, because we have areas where there's just been a longer research history, and people have been surveying and looking for a much longer period of time than they have in other places. So we need to keep in mind that the range that we have right now is what we know right now, but we also see that it actually changes every time, or it has the potential to change with just one single find.
So with all of this in mind, how can archaeologists determine if Neanderthals made it this far north? This is the research paper that inspired this whole interview, the Neanderthal niche space of Western Eurasia 145,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago. What Trini and Peter and Emil have been trying to do is understand the ecological niche that Neanderthals filled.
So you can look at the climate variables, for example, like the temperature range or precipitation range that a species found in, to get an idea of what temperatures are too cold for them to survive in and what temperatures are too hot for them to survive in, or what conditions are too wet or what conditions are too dry. And using that, you can constrain the areas that are actually on the landscape based on what sort of environments are occurring, how hot it is, or how wet it is, or how cold it is during the winter, to get an idea of that environment space that a species lives in.
So what Peter did here was use two big databases, two big sources of data to try and reconstruct this Neanderthal environment. The first was a database of Neanderthal sites. This was compiled by the ROCKE program, Role of Culture in Early Expansion of Humans. They're trying to gather together all this archaeological information that we have into one database, one location, so that archaeologists can use data to answer big questions. Use data from many sites in their studies. So now that you have all the Neanderthal locations plugged into your database, this was then combined with 800,000 years, another 800,000 years of climate reconstructions. Ecologists and biologists have been doing studies like this to understand the range of living animals for a long time, but By combining these two sets of data, archaeological, climatic, we can start to untangle the niche, the environment of an extinct species, of Neanderthals.
So these are the types of ranges that we're thinking about for temperature and precipitation and net primary productivity for Neanderthals, right? So you can see that it's like from about 250 to about 1500 is where we would predict Neanderthals to be, with the best habitats being somewhere around, I don't know what that is, 700, 800 millimeters. And then we can look at temperature, since you're talking about like how cold adapted they are, right? And you can see that a lot of the habitats are above freezing for their mean annual temperature, but beneath 20 degrees for their temperature. And that's a relatively narrow temperature band. And when we're thinking about the mean temperature that they would have liked, that's around 9 or 10 C, which isn't too far off from what we see during humans during the Holocene. And we can contextualize this based on what type of habitats existed in Europe, in Western Eurasia during that time.
There is no perfect modern analogy for the climate and the environment that Neanderthals lived in. But based solely on average precipitation and temperature, their ideal habitat would perhaps be similar to the Balkans. Sarajevo is maybe the modern city that most closely matches these temperature and rainfall levels. What I find interesting about that, though, is that the Balkans are quite warm. They do get harsh winters because they're far away from that Atlantic Gulf Stream, but it's quite a warm environment. And yet, I think when we imagine Neanderthals, we think of them as cold-adapted humans.
And your question is that were they cold-adapted or were they warm-adapted? It's a super interesting question, because it's obviously the answer is not simply either or. It's both, right? Because it depends on what you compare with or what your frame of reference is. So Neanderthals developed, or they evolved, in probably in Western Eurasia, at least on the Eurasian continent, and they did so in the temperate environments. And so, in that sense, they're cold adapted compared to equatorial humans, because that's the environment that they evolved in. But when we look at the Neanderthal range through time, through the more than 300,000 years that Neanderthals existed, we do see a preference towards warmer, milder periods and climates and places. So in that sense, they're warm-loving, but they are still cold-adapted. But they're not hyper-Arctic, and they're also not only adapted to warm interglacial environments, because we also see that they adapt to other types of environments, colder periods and places. So what is really special is that they somehow adapt to these changes. Sometimes it also doesn't go as well, right? We have episodes of bottlenecks, and we have episodes or places where we probably have local extinction. But overall, they are adapting to these things over time.
Once they've determined the parameters that Neanderthals are living in, Peter could go back to that climatic data and just see where that environment existed, regardless of where any archaeological sites are. You can kind of begin to separate their range from the limits of archaeology. This is what you're looking at. This is a map created by Peter and the team, projecting the environment, the ecological niche, onto a map of Europe. The green is their niche space. The blue is the expanding and contracting ice sheets during these time periods. It's not a static map. It's not based solely on the presence of archaeological finds. It's looking at the environment they liked and just seeing where it existed. One really interesting time period to pause on is around 120,000 years ago. Look how far the environment expanded north. As far as central Sweden, really far north.
You see here that it really expands north and also east. So you have principally suitable environments in large parts of southern Scandinavia and also to Eastern Europe. And it's really interesting that when it peaks right here, you really have a large expansion. And we also know archaeologically that Neanderthals are present in the North and East European steppe, which is really close to the corridor into the Jutland Peninsula, which is where we are sitting right now in Aarhus.
Okay, case closed. Neanderthals could have easily made it to Scandinavia. All we have to do is find the sites, blah, 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 bada bing, bada boom, skiddly pop. Not quite. Unfortunately, not quite. As with everything, there's lots of nuance, lots and lots of nuance.
there's another issue with this period. What we don't see in this map is, because the ice sheets are melting, the water has to go somewhere. So it goes into the sea. And that means that the sea level rises quite massively during the Eemian.
Scandinavia at that time looked like this. No ice caps at all. Much, much higher sea level. No doubt a very, very wet landscape.
So actually, this might have created boundaries in the landscape during the peak warm period.
There is some evidence that Neanderthals made short water crossings. Neanderthal-style tools have been found in Crete, which has been an island for 5 million years apparently. So for the entire time humans have been evolving, Crete has been an island. And yet seemingly there are Neanderthal-style tools there. So a short sea crossing was not necessarily a barrier for them. But if we are being strategic about our thinking and our targeting for archaeological excavations, Trini thinks a slightly later time might give us better results.
But as soon as you have a slightly cooler situation, which is still warm, so that would be at the end of the Eemian in the first interstadials into the Waxelian period, and they are coming up in the GIF in a moment, you actually see that the water is beginning to be tied up in the ice again, which means that the sea level rises. The sea level lowers, but but we still have warm periods, and that means that we actually both have extension of landmass, but also warmer climates in the regions that we're interested in. So these are actually the periods where it's most likely that you would have Neanderthal expanding into latitudes higher than 55 north.
This Neanderthal sweet spot is maybe around 100,000 years ago, a little bit later. Ice sheets are once again expanding. Sea levels have dropped. Sweden is once again joined to Denmark. The area would have been full of birch and pine forests. No doubt animals expanded into these environments, and they could have been followed by hungry Neanderthals very easily. Another factor to consider, another piece of nuance, is just how many Neanderthals were there? Full stop.
I mean, of course, we have one big issue is population density, right? So we're assuming that Neanderthals are very thin on the ground.
Estimating the size of extinct prehistoric populations is, of course, a very hard thing to do. But it seems there weren't many Neanderthals alive at any one time. Based on genetics and demographic modeling, maybe between 5,000 and 70,000 Neanderthals were alive at any one time.
So it's not... there's no high population pressure, and of course this really is important to understand what would drive expansion into the potential niche.
If we go back to that map paused at 120,000 years ago, there's this huge habitat opened up to the east. Does that mean Neanderthals necessarily filled it before the ice sheet started growing again? It's so tricky to say. The presence of Neanderthals at Denisova Cave suggests they could spread far when they had the need or desire to, but we don't know how far they pushed their range to the north. So we have this target of 100,000 years ago in mind. How do we go about finding sites in Scandinavia, in Denmark, that are 100,000 years old, bearing in mind the pressures and damage caused by later glaciations? How do we do that? How do they do that? When you look at a map like this of the LGM, it seems that the entire region was fully covered in ice, no gaps whatsoever. For the most part, that is true, but it does seem like there are some exceptions.
Only a very little part of southern Scandinavian was not covered by glaciers during the last glacial maximum. And that's also the corner where we are focusing on that we might have some remnant lakes from the Pleistocene.
Lakes do preserve archaeological remains really well. They're muddy shores, muddy banks, just gently burying things. It's really perfect.
We have sites at Leringen, Lichtenberg, Neumark Nord, Gröbern, Taubach. Many sites not that far away that many of them are found and preserved due to lakeshore environments because that's where there's good preservation, but also because that's probably a very active place for Neanderthal groups.
Finding these lost paleo lakes, though, is a challenge. Is a big challenge.
Today, in modern day, there are depressions. Today, they do not seem of much like they're still very flat. and oftentimes they're filled with modern bog, like wetlands. So nobody goes there to build a house or a road or anything. They just lay there, and they have been drained so that they can be used for fields, agriculture. So those depressions is really what we are looking into now, to see if those modern bogs they hit into glacial lakes underneath them.
It's not simply a question of finding a bog at the right age with sediments at the right age. These sediments, these layers, they have to be accessible too. If they find a Pleistocene lake, but the layer that's 100,000 years ago is 10 meters down, 20 meters down, that's such a challenge to excavate in, basically an impossible challenge to excavate. So Emil isn't just trying to find lakes of the right age, they also have to be close enough to the surface where an excavation is actually possible. I imagine that is quite a challenge to find that sweet spot.
It is quite a challenge.
Yeah. Usually I put it that I'm looking for the haystack. Then we have to look for the needle. But finding the haystack.
Yeah.
But I think it's always, because that's very true, but I think it's always a good reminder that, we've been in similar situation in other regions, right? Where suddenly one find or one object kind of changed everything. So you need to be able to be willing to take risks in archaeology in order to understand new things.
As far as I'm aware, the team is still searching for that perfect lake, that perfect location. A lot of work in this study is going into site selection just to try and maximize their chance of success. There is another place, though, where we can look for evidence of Neanderthals in the far north, above that 55th parallel north. But it's also a challenging environment to excavate in, for sure. Maybe even harder. The lost landmass of Doggerland. This is a small fragment of a Neanderthal cranium that was given the name Kreen. They lived about 50 to 70,000 years ago, ate a diet of meat and fish, were a pretty sturdy chap, it seems, and they had a benign tumor above their eye. What's kind of special about this Neanderthal, though, is that he was dredged up from under the North Sea, off the coast of the Netherlands. In all likelihood, he wasn't swept out to sea or anything like that. He lived in what is now the North Sea.
And on the other hand, when the sea goes really low, then you have also this landmass, so what we call Doggerland, connecting the British Isles to the continent. And that would probably have met what we call the Jutland Peninsula. So this large area would probably have been very suitable for animals, and of course also humans maybe hunting these animals during these periods.
If we're trying to picture an area where Neanderthals traveled far north, this would be an excellent location to search. The only problem is it's now so deep underwater. Doggerland sank beneath the waves around 8,500 years ago, causing Britain to become an island, the original Brexit.
And that means that there is a lot of potential out there, but it's more tricky to access it archaeologically because, of course, it requires a completely different strategy than on land.
One of our best chances to find evidence of Neanderthals in these regions, whether it's in Doggerland perhaps, or under a bog, may not be archaeological evidence, but genetic, environmental DNA, sometimes called SEDA-DNA, sedimentary ancient DNA. This is DNA that is preserved in sediment for thousands upon thousands of years. It's basically just tiny little pieces of bone, poo, lots of old poo. These things, of course, are full of DNA, chock full of DNA. They're just sitting in the sediment, and we can access those. We can test the dirt for DNA.
Because if we are able to actually identify Neanderthals in places based on DNA instead of archaeological sites, then we can actually get much better data set to use for this model as well. Of course, this is something that requires these samples and this work, but that's definitely a potential in the future.
One question I really wanted to ask the team is, from the sites we do have, like those in northern Germany, what can we actually say about how Neanderthals are living at the northern edge of their range, the northern edge of their environment? What do we know about how they're living that far north?
Well, one big difference about the northern landscapes and the more Mediterranean landscapes is that it's an open environment. At least on the North European and East European steppe, we don't have caves. So it's really flat, and the forests that we have are open forests, right? So it's an open environment compared to cave-like landscapes, right, or mountains landscapes. So this creates a fundamental different life way. In the open environments, you're highly dependent on the animals that are also present in these types of landscapes. So big herds of it could be reindeer in periods that are warmer. It could be horses, but there's also bison, and of course megafauna.
There's obviously no bigger megafauna than an elephant. And as we saw at this very start, Neanderthals were hunting them in northern Germany. The hunting of elephants wasn't just limited to Leringen, though. Archaeologists have found several sites with the butchered remains of these animals. Perhaps the most interesting is a site called Neumark Nord. Here, a total of 57 elephant remains have been found. It's, of course, very, very difficult to say how many hunting trips this involved and how long it took to accumulate these remains. There's evidence at this site for about 2,000 years of occupation, but it certainly shows deliberate hunting of these large animals. You can see all the cut marks on the bones. They seem to have a preference for adult males. Maybe these are the elephants they're most likely to find isolated and on their own rather than in a family group. There's just absolutely no question about it. These elephants were on the menu for Neanderthals. There's something a little bit funny going on at Neumark Nord, though. All of these elephants at Neumark Nord were hunted during that warm period around 125,000 years ago, when the Neanderthal range could have expanded far north into Scandinavia. At this time, Neumark Nord was on the edges of one of those Pleistocene lakes we've been talking about. Pine forests, birch forests. As the climate warmed even more, oak forests, deciduous oak forests. The environmental record strongly supports that. Lots and lots of trees. But around Neumark Nord, it wasn't so forested. According to the environmental record there at this site, it was much more open. The pollen record is dominated by upland ferns and plants that like a more open environment. This open environment coincides with a big spike of charcoal in the archaeological record too. Lots and lots of just tiny fragments of charcoal mixed into these sediments. Seemingly, according to the evidence that we have, fires were sweeping through the landscape, clearing the forest. Now, the dating of archaeological sites is complex. There's always a margin of error. There's always nuance, all of these things. But this open landscape seemingly existed for the 2,000 years that the Neanderthals were at the site and ended when they apparently left. So were Neanderthals responsible for these fires? They were certainly capable of starting fires and having fires. The archaeological record in Neumark Nord shows lots and lots of evidence of Neanderthals using fires in their day-to-day life. So were they deliberately clearing the land because it created the environment that they liked to hunt in? It's just so hard to say for sure, right? It's almost like a chicken and egg situation. Did the Neanderthals at Neumark Nord clear the land to attract the prey? Or were they attracted to the land because of that fire already? You know, which came first? Hard to say. Very hard to say. But if it is true that the landscape existed whilst the Neanderthals were occupying the site and became forest again once they left, that's kind of odd, isn't it? That would strongly suggest that Neanderthals were responsible for it. If true, that just says so much about Neanderthals' ability to shape the world around them, plan ahead, understand the environment that they're in. Yeah, just another fascinating piece of evidence that there's something going on in these brains of theirs. In these brains. I should have had this guy on the desk the whole time. Living in the north with no cozy caves to call home would have required Neanderthals to produce shelter and clothing of some sort.
And because we're in the open area, there's also the wind factor is an issue. So shelter and potentially clothing, we assume that they would have needed this to protect their bodies, but the evidence is indirect. So we have scrapers that shows a large degree of hide working. So we know that they're processing the hides from the animals that they're butchering, potentially to create various types of draping of fur and skin. But we just don't know exactly how this would have been manufactured.
At Brik Romani in Spain is home to some fantastic wooden Neanderthal artifacts like this trowel-shaped object. Just to be clear, the top is a reconstruction based on the imprint that a wooden object left behind. There's another site in France which seems to be a Neanderthal campsite, and it's enclosed with a small ring of post holes suggesting they're building fences of some kind. But these sites are just so rare. We only get the tiniest glimpses into this aspect of Neanderthal life. Absolutely no leather has survived as far as I'm aware. No hides, no clothing, nothing like that has survived. And, of course, Neanderthals have also not survived. They are extinct. We did interbreed with them, and we all have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA within us. So in that sense, they are not extinct in that sense, truly. But this form of human, with this skull, this brow, this type of human, truly no longer exists. I wanted to ask the team, what does the environmental record look like as we get closer to 40,000 years and they disappear from the archaeological record? Was there anything going on there?
So ignore all the other lines except this gray line in the background. So this is just counting all of the green cells from the animated GIF for each millennia, right? And so you can see after under 40,000 years ago, the niche space for Neanderthals, the potential niche space is expanding all the way up to MLS 5e. And so when we were looking at 100,000 years ago, a little beyond 100,000 years ago, this is that time period we're talking about when the potential niche space for Neanderthals was at its largest. Then we enter that glacial period where it again contracts back towards the southern and western part of Eurasia, and then another period of expansion.
As you can see, the Neanderthal niche space over the 100,000 years this study took place gradually declined from its high point around 120,000 years ago. It's a really clear illustration of just how variable the climate was in this period. Neanderthals had to adapt to huge changes in the environment. The climate would get colder, but they would cling on. It would recover, and then colder again, and they would cling on. Cold again, still holding on. So when they go extinct around 40,000 years ago, yes, their preferred environment is declining, but why didn't they recover this time, like all the other times? There has to be another factor, and that factor kind of has to be us, right?
And then right after that, the niche space is contracting again, at the same time that we believe modern humans are moving into the region as well.
Perhaps Neanderthals could have adapted to these changes given enough time, but with new groups entering the region, bringing new technologies, new ways of life, was the pressure too much for them? Was it this 1-2 punch of modern humans entering and the climate getting colder, contracting? Was this pressure just too much for them? What I really love about this study and chatting to the team here is that they've combined so many different lines of evidence, archaeological, climatic, geological, to try and push the boundaries of our knowledge, to help archaeologists select better sites, push our understanding of Neanderthals into new areas, and hopefully find them in unexpected places. Who knows how far we'll be able to push them.
But should we get more sites, or if we wanted to expand that spatial extent, like all the way to East Asia, right? It would be relatively easy to do because all of this data is available online. So updating it just means adding in the new data, and then it'll just run through it automatically and print out the new results. So it's really updatable. We're really hoping that people do use it in that way, where it's a constant test and reassessment of the results we have. What do new finds actually mean for our conclusions that we made in this paper?
It's so exciting to be studying all this stuff at this time. We're really living in a golden age. And yeah, if you're watching this from Denmark, southern Sweden, if you live next to a bog, keep an eye out for some Neanderthal artifacts, some Neanderthal remains, or or Emil at least, doing some coring in your street. They're almost certainly out there. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Huge shout out to the Patreons for supporting me as always. Big thanks to Mosgard Museum for letting me use Tom Bjorklund's incredible artwork. Shout out to Ettore for that incredible artwork too. And yeah, Trini, Emil and Peter were so lovely to speak to, so helpful with making this video, and donated their speaker's fee to UNICEF. So they were just great. Shout out to them. I can't wait to see this research expanded. I can't wait for us to get a better idea of the Neanderthal range, try and find them somewhere. It's great, it's great. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Maybe watch another video. That would be great. Bye.